It was the first hole of my second round this afternoon. The first hole out here at DAC is a par 5, and I hit a drive, and then I hit a little 3-iron into the hole for a double eagle, too. Of course, it's not a bad way to start a round.
Ras, I understand that you've played on the Pro Tour before, but you had a little bad luck and you lost your sponsor.
Well, I've been playing since the first this year, and I feel like I've made a little progress. I've made a little money this year. I've made about $4,500, and my sponsor had a little financial difficulties of his own, and I lost him a couple of weeks ago. So right now I'm sort of looking, and of course I hope I can go out to Pebble Beach and play real good and pick up a good check out there. But right now I'm looking for any help I can get.
Ben, yesterday you won the Texas State Amateur Championship, and now you're out here today trying to qualify for the U.S. Open. How are you physically?
I'm physically beat right now. I'm especially 36 holes today. 18 holes yesterday in San Antonio was pretty humid down there, and I had a lot of pressure on me the last day. I had a one-shot lead going into the last day, and just played pretty sloppily and won by one. But today it was probably meant a little more to me. I played in the last two Opens, and I really wanted to qualify for this one real bad, and looks like I struggled through another qualifying.
I also read where you've been putting bad, and I just saw you miss an 18-inch putt.
Yeah, that was a real short one. Somebody told me that even par had to go in a swat fest, so I just kind of relaxed there, and my putting is really off right now. I'm just not hitting my putt solid. Greens out here are a little bumpy, but they're bumpy for everybody, and I just putted bad today.
Okay, so what do you plan to do between now and time to play?
Toby, the hits have been falling for you, haven't they?
Yes, sir. I've been very lucky, and they've been falling with guys on base. So I'm just happy that, I managed to get a couple of ribbies, and we've been lucky to win a couple games here and there. As soon as our big guys start hitting a little bit, we'll be all right.
Have you been doing anything differently at the plate?
No, not really. I've just been trying to keep my strikeouts down and making contact, and I think that's really important for a shortstop, just to make contact up there at the plate.
Are you proud of the way you've done against the first, second, and third place clubs?
Real proud. They have real good pitching. Oakland and Minnesota and Baltimore and teams like that, they have real good pitching. Anytime you get a couple hits against these guys, you have to be kind of proud.
Somehow this seems to be a far cry from where I usually see you out with a crowd of 60,000 around.
Well, that's true, Vern. We're just out here having some fun during off-season.
Is this, Mike, the tri-sport, is it something that you ride for fun or pleasure? Are you going to enter these races or what?
Well, no, I'm not going to. The factory won't let us compete in the races, and Coach Landry won't either. So it's a fun vehicle, plus it's a work vehicle. You can use it for all applications. It'll work in snow and mud and dirt and everything else, sand. So it's an all-around vehicle that we have fun with, and they're, like everything else, everybody competes on. Anything that's designed, I think everybody will compete, somehow or another, get to a competition stage. So that's what we're doing.
Last September, by order of the federal courts, students from all over the city boarded buses that carried them to schools far outside their neighborhoods. Most of the bus students attended their assigned schools. Some did not. A lot of the problems in the beginning were because one group did not know what to expect of the other. There were some racial incidents, however, at Bowles-Story, Comstock, and Hood Junior High schools, and the most serious at Skyline High School, in which several students and teachers were injured. This school year had its share of boycotts and student demonstrations also. Blacks thought they weren't being treated fairly. Whites thought they weren't being treated fairly. In spite of adult anxieties, the students, black, white, and brown, say They have gained some understanding, tolerance, and respect of what integration among people means. Although the school year started off in a confused state, it appears to have worked itself out, at least for the end of this school year. I talked to teachers and a parent about what kind of year it's been.
I think it's been a very good school year. There's been some real trying times, but overall, I think we've had a good year.
Well, it's been a lovely year overall with the students bussed in and a great principal. We've had quite a few problems, but they were worked out among the students. And so far, so good.
In fact, I was pleasantly surprised. I was quite concerned, as I think most parents were, as to what kind of year it would be. I was really relieved to see, I think the adults as well as the students got an education this year in learning how to live together.
This particular science classroom is empty, but hopefully it is typical of classrooms throughout the district. School desegregation in Dallas, however, is still a question mark. Educators have not had a chance to do a careful evaluation of what kind of year it's been. Well, what about next year? The Dallas desegregation case is still pending with the Fifth Circuit. Perhaps next year, students and teachers won't have the same problems they did this year.
Well, basically the biggest one would be overcrowding. The fact that the jail is overcrowded, and state law requires that there not be overcrowding. And there is failure to provide recreation, rehabilitation, and other matters.
bodies of Mr. and Mrs. E.J. Myers were found April 14, 1970 at a Love Field motel. Authorities told of a disturbance call to that room earlier in the day, but a man who answered the door would not let officers in because they had no search warrant. The bodies were later found, and the man who answered the door was identified by Dallas officers as Lawrence Richard Gross. The 36-year-old Gross was arrested at a hospital in St. Louis, Missouri 10 days later, where he had been taken after attempting suicide. Gross was later extradited to Dallas. Today, Gross sported a beard and long hair in the third-floor courtroom of visiting Judge Guy Jones of Texarkana. A request was made by Gross' attorney, Charles Tessimer, that each juror picked for the case be immediately sequestered until the trial is over. I talked with Tessimer at his office to inquire about the unusual request.
It's my opinion in a capital case that a judge uses good judgment when he sequesters the jury. Then there's no question of them getting a hold of some testimony or a piece of evidence or a newspaper story or a piece of television reporting that would be prejudicial to either side. Now, in the ordinary case, the risk isn't great. But in a case of this nature, where the defendant is on trial for his life, I think it is an excellent thing that the judge has done.
I'm sure you're familiar with the law of economics. It says as you raise the price of a product, the price of air transportation, you force people out of the market. And it's true in every business, it's true in the airlines. We can't price ourselves out of this market. We would view this, and we have viewed it with extreme concern, as being a burden, and a serious burden on our industry, on our passengers, on the airports, and on the communities.
After all, the great advantage in air transportation is the saving of time. With the advent of the interstate highways, a trip within 250 miles of Dallas is almost as close by automobile as it is by air. We feel that any further delay in passenger boardings would be enough for us to consider an alternate means of transporting people to Dallas within this 250-mile radius.
We're going to tax the very group that's doing one of the greatest jobs for us, and that's the people that use the airlines. And I don't see them represented here, and I feel like that group needs representation, and because I feel that way, I'm going to vote no for that.
Well, I think it was quite obvious that many of the councilmen were really impressed with the prestigious group that were flown in here by all of the airlines and the air transport associations, and certainly they were awed by it.
I have to agree with Mr. Kimball, and our financial situation is a lot different now than it was at the time those were voted in. So I cannot support it either today.
Well, I think primarily, Jerry, it's a consideration of the taxpayer who has to pay the bill for the upkeep of the Tarrant County Hospital and the hospital district. Now, over the last few months, we've had a lot of problems, or at least some of us have, in relating to the hospital board, and especially to the management of the hospital, that we want to be made aware of all large expenditures.
Today, many of the governor delegates agreed that federal money, as doled out by the Law Enforcement Assisted Administration, is doing the job for fighting crime. But there were also objections. Governor Milton Shapp of Pennsylvania struck out against LEAA for what Shapp calls turning toward local financing instead of regional, that is, statewide financing. Governor Russell Peterson of Delaware pointed out that the first offense criminal isn't so much of a problem as second and third offenders. But Maryland Governor Marvin Mandel is alarmed at what he calls the next crime problem states will face.
While the crime rate may be reducing, in the city of Washington, in our adjoining counties to the city of Washington, one increased 30% and the other increased 40%. And a review of those statistics indicates that the criminal is moving his base of operation out of the metropolitan area into the rural area, because the great number of crimes that have been committed are by residents of Washington moving over into our suburban counties.
There are more politics going on today than simply the politics of crime and how to finance the fight against it. Both Democratic and Republican governors caucused this morning to discuss presidential campaigns. Governor William Milliken of Michigan, speaking for the Republican governors, says the consensus of this caucus is satisfaction with Spiro Agnew as the vice presidential candidate, and he says John Connally is certainly expected to work for President Nixon in Texas, perhaps in other states as well. Pennsylvania Governor Milton Schaap notes that Democrats face the problem of another chaotic national convention, but he blames the problem on the new McGovern rules. Governor Schaap says he and 3 other governors are now working to drastically cut the number of delegate challenges in Miami this summer. Conspicuous by their absences at this convention are Ronald Reagan of California and George Wallace of Alabama. Today, governors unanimously approved a telegram expressing their condolences and wishing Governor Wallace a speedy recovery. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move at the National Governors Conference in Houston. A lot of these governors obviously have a pretty bad case of who cares. Oh, they sit politely for the most part and let themselves be lectured by experts on this and that, and it would certainly be unfair to say that they were not interested in any of the sessions here at the conference. For example, the discussion today on reducing crime was very lively. But obviously, uppermost in the minds of most of these chief executives is the knowledge that 1972 is an election year, and the powerful undercurrent at the conference is pointed toward the national conventions this summer and the general election in November. There's more backslapping, ear whispering, and jockeying for a power base, or in other words, practical politics, going on here than anything else. So far, this has resulted in Michigan Governor Milliken's announcement that Republicans certainly expect John Connally to work for Richard Nixon in Texas and perhaps in other states as well. Texas Governor Preston Smith, the host governor, countered by saying that John Connally probably couldn't do much good for the Republicans and would be better off working for the Democrats. At large, the Democrats have publicly torn their hair over convention problems. They say we can expect chaos at Miami Beach this summer simply because delegates will be trying for decisions on the new McGovern convention rules. So while the spotlight is on the microphone up there, the action is a lot closer to the dark corners of the ballroom. Phil Reynolds, Channel 8 News on the Move.